Hi, my name is Alison Kimball. I work at Wolfram Research, and I'm going to be talking about our mentorships program.
Hi, my name is Emma Yang. I'm an 8th grader in New York, and I'll be talking about my learning experience with the Wolfram Mentorships program.
Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our mentorship program and introduce Emma, who's actually one of the students in the mentorship program. So you might have heard a little bit about the program from Stephen's keynote, but just some background info. It's part of the Wolfram Foundation, which is part of our educational initiative side of things. So things like the summer programs or local outreach, or even the new computational thinking initiative are part of the Wolfram Foundation. So it started just about maybe 18 months ago, and it really picked up speed last August, which is when I started working here. So, the basic idea is that it's a virtual mentorship. So we will work on a project with a student for 3 to 6 months, working like 5 to 10 hours a week on their side, and then meeting with them for about a half hour to an hour a week. So who's in the program right now? We have about 20 students, and they are a wide variety of ages, but for the most part, they're in high school. So Emma, as you can tell, is a little bit on the younger side of things. But we also have people who are transitioning careers or in college, or some summer school students who decided to continue with their projects after the summer school. But for the most part, they are high school students. One thing that the students all have in common is that they are already comfortable with the Wolfram language, or at least can get comfortable pretty quickly. So it's not so much a boot camp like our summer programs. It's more so, can you build this project? So I guess the next thing to talk about is what type of projects are done in the mentorship program. So we have a list of open projects that, for the most part, that's what the students are choosing from. And there's a huge range of projects, so things that don't involve any programming at all, like adding to our word list and finding obscure languages and adding words in, or even tracing the history of math textbooks, or things like generating art using neural networks. But then there are really programming-heavy projects like connecting to D-Wave API, or Loris up here connected ROS to the Wolfram language and was able to, that drone is being powered by his code. Another project is fingerprint identification. And then there are things that are sort of in between, like medium programming, so building classifiers, or you can't really tell that's a bad image, but that code's part of a cryptography project. So with that, I'm going to introduce Emma and let her take things, but I'll be around after to answer questions if you have any about the mentorship program. Thanks. Okay, we'll turn it off.
That should be working. Okay, so I'm an 8th grader in New York, and I've been in the mentorships program since about January. So let me tell you how it all got started. So last year, I went to a maker fair in New York, which is like all this, like these tech booths go and present their work. And Dr. Wolfram was making a talk there, and I attended his talk, and then I actually discussed with him a project I was doing involving image identification, and he pointed me in the direction of the mentorships program like a few months later. And then he actually also sent me his then pretty new book, An Elementary Introduction to the Wolfram Language. And actually, one morning I was called into the principal's office, and I thought that I had done something wrong. But then it turned out that Dr. Wolfram had actually mailed me a book, and then they wanted to give it to me, so that was pretty cool. So I joined the mentorships program this January, and I started by learning how to do the Wolfram language, because prior to that I didn't really have much experience in it. So I began by following with the book, mainly the online version. I worked through the exercises, which are part of each chapter of the book, which I thought were really helpful And I met up weekly with my mentors, and we discussed all these challenging areas that I was having trouble with. And then after a period of time when I got pretty comfortable with the language, I identified a project with them so I could apply what I've learned. So what I really like about the Wolfram language in terms of a learning experience is how easy and instantaneously you can do visualizations. So in other language I've learned, like Scratch, Java, Swift, there's a lot of setup you have to do before you can actually generate stuff. And there's a lot of things that you have to initially learn how to do before you can actually get your hands into coding. What I really like about Mathematica and the Wolfram language is that you can easily just generate a line of code that will generate things like circle shapes or 3D images of structures of, for example, here I have a skull. I also really like how there's a lot of built-in data. So in other languages, you have to kind of import data or take data from somewhere else, and it takes a lot of time to learn how to import that data and then process it and then make it usable. Here, what I really like is that in Mathematica, everything is built into the language. So you can connect to Wolfram Alpha and get pictures of planets, for example, and then I can play around with that. And then there's also a really wide range of data I can get. So we also have things like speeches, and then we have text from books and things like that. So there are really a lot of applications of the language that exist that you don't need to have a lot of experience with the language until to get there. You can just start playing around with it. So what's different about learning the Wolfram language with my experience so far is that I really like how concepts really build on each other. So and also everything connects to create a bigger picture. So in other languages, you really have to have a lot of foundation before you can do kind of multi-level programming. Here, you can really get your hands into it, and things really build on each other, and it's a lot easier to get your hands into it. And also, it doesn't really focus on one single programming paradigm. So in Java, for example, you have to learn how to do object orientation, and then learn all that setup things that you don't really need to do with the Wolfram language. So here we can just start get your hands into the coding and get started. And all that gives you more room to experiment around with the language and to kind of just play around and learn through experimenting, which I think is much more interesting to me rather than having to kind of go through like this is this concept, that's this concept before you can actually start playing around and having fun with the language. So a couple things that I found challenging were things like things that didn't really pop up in other conventional languages. So, for example, patterns don't really turn up where you can kind of filter out different criteria from like a set of data. So that I didn't really find in any other languages. So in general, new concepts. Also, kind of things like repeating functions and pure functions. What I found really helpful to overcome those challenges, though, were things like, for example, we're here. This is I found pretty straightforward, but once we got to things like this, it could get confusing from jumping from a pretty simple example to like a more complex thing. So what I found was really helpful was to see step by step, like how do you get from, say, here to programming something a little more complicated like this. So for another example of that would be here. This is I found pretty simple. Like you can blur each circle in the list. But then once we got to this, it can get more confusing. So I thought that if my mentors really gave me good step-by-step explanations, which really helped in the process. So far with the Mentorships program, I've done 2 projects. So the first one was on data. Most of them have been encompassing kind of like data visualization using the Wolfram language. So the first one I did was starting in about January, February time. And I did one where I found this data set from the New York City Open Data, which has all this government data from New York City, which is where I'm from. And there was one data set on all these motor vehicle collisions around the city. So I took that data and put it into Mathematica, and I was able to kind of analyze and build tools where you can build visualizations, like graphs, maps, and things like that, of like the different causes of accidents, distribution over time of day, and things like that. The second one is I participated in quite recently. This one was called the Opportunity Project, which was a project run by the White House in which we took all this government open data that existed and built tools that could help the government find all these opportunities for people all around the country. So I took this data set that they had on the USDA's Summer Food Service Program, which is all these summer meal sites they have, to find summer meal sites for kids over the summer who usually get lunch from school, but then they don't have an alternative over the summer. So I built a tool where you can kind of zoom in on zip codes for DC to find these summer meal sites. So for me, the next steps, I'm really I'm trying to dive into like neural networks and machine learning within Mathematica. And also I'm really interested in the Internet of Things, the intersection between that and the Wolfram language. So that's like the next steps for me. So I just want to talk about the structure of the Mentorships program and my experience through it. So I meet with Alison and my other mentors weekly, and then we go over like the project I'm doing, any trouble I'm having with coding, and then like approaches for me if I want to build something, then how should I approach this problem, and a lot of things like that. So I think that from my learning experience, the book, the Elementary Introduction to the Wolfram Language book, is a really great place to start. It has a lot of really great examples, step-by-step kind of examples on each concept, and also the development platform is like a free online platform where anyone can sign in for free and they can just start playing around with code, and it's connected to the programming lab, which I think is really helpful because I tried it out using that, and it has all these explorations on how you can do, like, for example, the circle scapes I showed before was from there, where you can just, it'll show you how to do a lot of cool things using code, and it's basically made so that kids can learn how to explore around with code and play around it within themselves. Yeah, so I would just like to give a special thanks to Dr. Wolfram for introducing me to the Mentorships program, and then my mentors from Wolfram, Alison, John, and Todd. Yeah, so thank you.